Ambassador Gautam, and thank you everybody. I shall make my presentation very brief, but as desired by the chair, Ambassador Gautam, I would stick to the points that you have flagged. See, our seminar is about development cooperation between Myanmar and Northeastern India and India, with special focus on borderlands. This is one. Then the second issue is, what are the challenges that we are facing, that we are not, that our trade is going down, formal trade not happening. What are the challenges? Who are responsible for that? And what are the opportunities, right? And then the third issue is about, can we have new institutional mechanisms and new narrative, okay, whereby the issues faced by Myanmar as well as Northeast India can be understood. Do we have a framework, a new narrative, whereby on the third issue that you flagged, what are the new institutional mechanisms that we can bring together so that the problems and the opportunities can be properly used by both Northeast India and Myanmar. Now here, the first thing that we need to know is India's foreign policy. You know better. India's foreign policy has now changed. It is seeking for global presence, as a result of which India's Act-East policy is now essentially an Asia-Pacific issue, so that ASEAN is becoming merely a stepping stone, even though ASEAN is central to our global ambitions. That is one. Then, secondly, India's Act-East policy. What is India's Act-East policy, and what is India's latest stand? That is where you made a pertinent point of what happened to RECP. India has withdrawn from the RECP, right? And now India thinks that we cannot have these deficits any longer. 109, billion debt with these RECP countries. We cannot have that. We cannot have our manufacturing not protected. So India is becoming protectionist, isn't it? And that is, I believe, one reason why India and Myanmar's trade has suffered in many ways. This is one. Then this has been highlighted on trade. What is India government's thinking? Let us go to Niti Aayog's, the think tank of India. What does it say? Those countries with whom we have signed FTAs, we have not done any better in terms of trade with other people with whom we have not signed these FTAs. This is number one. Number two, you see, our exports are determined mainly by incomes and demand, and not by tariff or prices. Okay, so this is the new thinking. In other words, India is now becoming lukewarm. And if we remember Delhi Declaration of 2018, isn't it? India now emphasizes on maritime, terrorism, connectivity, and merchandise trade has been sidelined. This is the reality of India government's real foreign policy stance. Now, about the issue of these trade between Myanmar and India. Now, neither Myanmar nor Northeast India nor India has a macro plan, okay, to normalize trade. Number one. Neither do Myanmar nor Northeastern India have any, policy or thought on economic livelihoods, on tradable goods, on industries, what to do with them. We are still to come up with this. I would say that the ICP that India has set up is quite modern, and almost all the facilities are available. And number one. Number two, this duty-free tariff preference scheme. This is unoperational because in reality on the ground, if people from Myanmar or from India have to, export goods on DPT, direct tariff preference scheme on the ground because of non-tariff barriers, because of other non-tariff taxes. You have to pay something like 35% taxes. Therefore, Myanmar's duty-free tariff preference scheme, it's not operational to them. So because of many of these problems, you see, normal trade is not going through over there. Okay. So therefore, I would say that we have to look for other means, other institutional means. And I would suggest, I'm looking at the watch, Gautam. So I would suggest two things. One, the border trade agreement was resigned by India unilaterally. That needs to be revived now. This is one. Number two, this free trade agreement, India has to negotiate a free trade agreement with Myanmar on bilateral terms. You see, these are realities. When India is away from the RCEP, India is now a little bit less interested in Asian because of deficits and so many things. It's time for Northeastern region and for Myanmar, especially the border state, to think of a new border trade agreement which is fair both to Myanmar and to Northeastern region. Number one. Number two, we have to negotiate for a free trade agreement, a new free trade agreement, because I think this is what Niti Aayog thinks. What Niti Aayog is saying is that India has to revise all its free trade agreements. Okay, we have to revive it. It is the opportunity time for India, for Northeastern India and Myanmar to think really of a new border trade agreement as well as a new free trade agreement. Lastly, the last point which you made, which is very pertinent. We may think there is no trade, but there is a huge amount of informal border trade. Why is it happening? To my opinion, as I have repeatedly said, it's because the traders on the ground prefer this informal trade. Why? Because of non-tariff barriers, because of high transaction costs. So if we do not bring about real institutional changes, new institutional changes and new economic narratives, which can be brought about, I think, by a border trade agreement or a free trade agreement, which should be renegotiated again. Thank you.